Good morning, everyone, and welcome to the extended show, the Wednesday show, the longer show, because it comes from the Saturday free show. I'm kind of jumping the gun here. If you don't know, if you're new to the show, welcome, everyone. My name is Jason Miles, and I'm your host for This is Revolution Podcast. And one thing we've been doing on the show recently, in the last 4 or 5 months, is we had the ability to simulcast on some of our friends' shows. And we've had Daniel Bessner on the show a few times, and this was supposed to happen a little while back, and things didn't work out. Now it finally happened, and we got to do a cross collab, if you will, a posse cut with the entire This is Revolution crew and Daniel and Derek of American Prestige. And it was a great conversation, as you can imagine, with 7 people on a screen at once. Everybody wants to be heard. I don't think there was too much stepping on toes. We definitely had fun. But try to be informative. But this episode is going to be a little gloomy. I'm not going to lie to you. In this episode, we pose the question, is the American Empire over? Are we seeing the decline and the fall of the American Empire? And what's interesting is when you hear the question, you expect to hear maybe a lot of doom and gloom about comparisons to Rome, or Greece, or the British Empire. And there was very little bit of that, and more talk of how the American Empire is kind of here to stay, even though it's a ramshackle empire. It's not a glorious empire. You know, we definitely talk about wealth inequality. We talk about the right-wing takeover of the Republican Party. And there's an interesting back and forth between a lot of us and Pascal. And I wouldn't say we were disagreeing wholeheartedly, but where he feels that any sort of social goods governance may come from the right. And he wasn't saying this as oh, I'm so excited for the right. It's more or less. He sees the pivot they're trying to make and the rhetoric they are using to continue their power grab in the 50-plus year counter-revolution. So this was a good show. There was a lot of great comments in the chat. If you want to watch shows like this in real time, and Saturday tends to be the day when we get the most viewers, the best way to do it is YouTube. YouTube.com/This is Revolution Podcast. And if you have the means and you feel so inclined and you would like to help the show grow, well, become a patron. Depending on what patron level you're at, you can get some free merchandise. Patreon.com/Bitter Lake Presents. So this was a fun one. I can't wait to do this one again. We've been doing these cross collabs on the weekends, and it's been some good weekend shows, but I think this might be the last weekend show with Mean Djene Bajalan, who has pretty much taken over the reins as the behind-the-scenes show producer. He does a lot of production tasks that you guys don't see. He's been creating these thumbnails for the show, and he's been helping with guest booking. But he is expecting a new Bajalan any day now. As I am recording this right now, there could be a Bajalan coming out the Bajalan chute right now, ready to see the world. So he's going to be taking some months off for that. We are sad in one respect, but extremely excited Expect to see more of Stefan on the weekends. Stefan Bertram Lee. He was on the show some time ago talking about his journey in northern Syria. He's the young person that got tired of online discourse and was like, you know what, F this. I'm joining the PKK. And so there is a movie being made about Stefan and his journey. But he is an extremely sharp young person. Wit is equally as sharp and fits right in with the This Is Revolution show. So Stefan will be coming in. We'll probably get some more help from people like Doug Lane while Djene is gone, daddying it up with the newborn. So we're all excited. So if you guys, wherever you're listening to this show, there's links in the description to Djene's Twitter. Send him a congratulations tweet. I'm sure he would like to see that. And stay tuned for a very, very rapid fire show. There was like no quiet moments on this show. American Prestige Podcast. This is Revolution Podcast. And another thing, Daniel Bessner and I this past weekend were supposed to be at a speaking engagement in Los Angeles. And we were very bummed that that speaking engagement got canceled due to COVID. There was a bit of a COVID outbreak at the bookstore we were supposed to speak at. So we're trying to hook something up for the end of the year with Ben Burgess and maybe Bessner as well and some other people. So stay tuned for that information, because we want to do more live things as certain restrictions get lifted. So here is the Cross Collab episode with American Prestige. And this is Revolution. Out. Good morning, everyone, and welcome to another episode of This is Revolution Podcast. I am your host, Jason Miles, and this is something we do like to do on the weekends where we have these cross-collaboration episodes with other shows that we like. Sorry, let me move this out of the way. Since we have such a packed house, let me hurry up and get into the introductions of who's here from the This is Revolution team. Let me introduce my co-host, my homie, my dog. He is the man of the Mau Mau Hour, the Pascal Robert.
Peace and greetings to the chat. Peace and greetings to the audience. Peace and greetings, Jason, Ms. Miles.
We don't see our good friend Marcus here yet. I don't know what happened to Marcus.
Marcus went for Jamaican beef patties.
Oh, well, in the absence of Marcus, we do have one of the co-hosts of our Foreign Policy Thursdays. You know him as the supreme leader of Death Star middle management. He is Deep State Kuba.
What a disappointment. That's not Deep State Kuba. That's Slick Back Hair Djene.
Slick Back Djene. That would be a good name. Derin Devlet. The Deep State. The Turkish Deep State. Biz Ankara'dan geldik. Biz size...
You're confusing our audience. You're confusing our audience, Gene.
If you do the whole show speaking nothing but Kurdish, that's the funniest thing ever.
That was Turkish, but yeah, I could do the whole show.
Can you do the whole show in Kurdish?
In Turkish, I could do the whole show in Turkish. Hoş geldiniz yoldaşlar.
Please
Biz devrim içinde hazırız.
I feel like
nice,
my mom all kinds of whores.
No, I would never say something like that. That's ayıp. That's forbidden. That's shame. You know, ayıp.
Call someone's mom a whore?
Yeah, that's a big shame in the Middle East. That's how you get stabbed.
It's also how you get stabbed in the hood.
See, we have cultural connections. Solidarity. You get stabbed if you say something about someone's mama in the Middle East. That's like a death sentence.
Also,
again, very similar to the hood. Speaking of the hood, we have our favorite black man that was in the frosty suburbs of Maine, and now he is in the chocolatey city of Northern Virginia. He is Marcus of the Left Flank Vets.
What did I come into? And I gotta ask, Gene, is Kuba wearing you? Is Kuba wearing a Gene suit?
He might be. Kuba's like Ken the doll. Like the clothes are like molded onto him. He has like molded on underpants.
I thought you meant he's like Ken the doll because he has no genitals.
I mean, I don't know about that, but
Kuba's like a Ken doll. He has no penis.
It's all smooth down there.
That's what they do to you in the deep state. That's how they make sure you don't fall for compromise. They like weld your.
Now that you're working here, you won't be needing these. Snip.
Snip, snip.
Well, I think I see the real general leader of the Death Star middle management. He's always firing the guy that's supposed to shoot the gun in the Death Star. He is Deep State Kuba.
Gentlemen, Saddam and Stalin had doubles, so I figured, right, like if it's good enough for them, I should work on one myself. I don't think the Gene model is quite right because
Kuba's
it
like
talks back.
Kuba's like 10 inches taller than me too.
So you're like a me.
Yeah, exactly.
I thought you guys were both auditioning.
Kuba and Manuba.
I thought you guys were both auditioning for Men in Black or something. That's all I was wondering.
Oh, Black Men
like
and Men in Black.
Are you the bootleg? Are you the bootleg made in Iraqistan? Kuba?
Yeah. They don't make anything in Iraqistan, so no.
Yeah, it's made in China, but for the Iraqistani market.
Yeah. I got some made in China Wheezies from the market in Suleimania. I got all, but they fell to pieces. I got Spider-Man shoes. I had all these great shoes.
I love bootleg stuff.
Oh yeah, bootleg Turkish Spider-Man is a classic, right?
Yeah, oh, yeah.
I actually almost bought a bootleg Ohio State jersey when he had gone to, I think we were in UAE. We'd stopped in port there. But the logo, the Ohio State logo that's in like the center of the chest was upside down.
Sacrilege.
Nope, can't do it.
I have a little collection of pictures I've taken in various parts of the world with bootleg toys that don't match, and I love it. I think it's the most amazing thing ever.
You can get in Iraq. One thing that's very popular is Hitler T-shirts.
Weird.
Big Hitler fans.
Yes.
Big Hitler fans.
Indonesia too.
there was a Kurdish guy, and I don't know if this is true. He named his kids Hitler and Stalin. And when someone asked him, why did you call your kids Hitler and Stalin? It was like, because they are strong men. Strong men.
And they're always fighting each other.
Well, let's bring in the American Prestige boys. American Prestige is a podcast about the United States and the friends it made along the way. It's hosted by Derek Davison, a foreign policy analyst. I can't talk right now. Analyst. And Daniel Bessner, associate professor in international studies. Daniel Bessner is also a friend of show that has been on a couple times, where we get to shit all over Barack Obama whenever he comes on. So we will not be Barack Obama shitting today. He is not going to be the topic of discussion. But let's bring in Derek and Daniel, double D's, for a double dose of this pimp. Derek and Daniel from American Prestige.
Hey guys.
Hey guys.
Thanks for having us. And the Hitler conversation reminds me, Derek, you might remember this in 2018. There was that Peruvian election that pitted a guy named Hitler after a guy named Lenin. Do you remember this? This is real. I'll put it in the chat.
You're gonna have to refresh my memory. Oh, okay.
Yeah.
All right.
It was like a whole thing. And there was a famous, I think it was an Argentinian like military leader who was named something similar like Hitler Stalin. It's like a thing that happened in reactionary countries in the 60s and the 70s, particularly anti-communist countries did like a Hitler name, funnily enough. I forget. It was a very famous thing. I'll try to find it. But yeah, hey, you guys. Thanks for having us.
No problem. It is all good.
Yeah, there he is.
There it is.
There's
There
our
it
man
is.
Hitler.
The good Hitler
The good
wins
Hitler.
mayoral seat over Lenin in Peruvian district. There you go.
I
History.
mean, I'll
No,
take a
no.
bad Lenin over a good Hitler any day.
And in the Soviet Union, a big name was Marlin for Marx Lenin. That was a big name in the 70s and 80s as well.
Is that who Marlon Wayans is named after?
No,
Yeah,
that's with an O.
There was a sectarian communist group from Iraq that basically moved to the UK, and it basically collapsed because their big policy thing when they moved to the UK was to have sexual freedom, which sounded like a good idea when you were in the mountains of Iraq, but was not so. Basically, all the guys were like, hey, we all need to have sexual freedom. But they all discovered that their wives were actually way more successful at having sexual freedom in London than they were. And I just remember there was this guy who's, was very depressed because his wife was like having a lot of sexual freedom and he was not having a lot of sexual freedom. And his kids were called Marx and Engels, not Karl and Frederick, Marx and Engels. So these poor Iraqi kids in London called with the first name Marx and the first name Engels, whose basically dad was a depressed cuck. That's a true story. Worker Communist Party. Worker Communist Party of Iraq. It was like a really crazy cult.
Yeah, if that's not the beginning of a good leftist organization, I don't know what is.
We will have sexual freedom in Europe.
We're here today to talk about the declining empire that is America. We were one of the richest nations in the world, but we were the worst prepared to handle COVID because we have such a horrible public health infrastructure. Wealth inequality at crazy feudal levels. I can't talk right now. Levels. Follies overseas. Is the empire over, fellas?
Way to cheer me up, dude.
Is this what we're
I mean,
seeing right now?
that does seem like something that would cheer you up, actually.
Yeah.
So I'm gonna. Sorry, Pascal, please.
Besnay, my man Besnay with the beignets. I want to chime in and say, it ain't over till the fat lady sings.
Is she not singing right now? I passed an overweight woman singing as I went and got my coffee this morning.
Apparently, you guys didn't see that the bipartisan infrastructure bill got passed. So I don't know how you can't say
Yeah,
that.
everything's good now.
Pump your brakes. Because I posted an article late last night. The 1.2 or $3 trillion bill, or the
Republican
1.3
bill.
trillion
The Republican bill.
with the progressive bill.
The Republican.
Just the bipartisan deal. Just the Republican.
Don't pump the That's not the Build Back Better. The Build Back Better part is to combine them both.
Yeah, he didn't say that.
Yeah.
He said the
No. Yeah.
I was like,
Yeah.
hold on a second.
Well, that's why, I mean, obviously, we need to be pragmatic in our expectations. Okay? We need
So what you're saying is the bill that's going to be the wealth transfer upward to the construction and development industry and real estate industry in the United States is the
They need help too, Pascal. They need help too.
Corporations are people. Don't you remember that, Ronnie?
The bill
Pascal, you just don't care about people. Like there are hardworking people in the landlord sector. There are hardworking people in the health insurance sector. You know, this
is a hardworking person.
Selfish kind of thinking that leftists always have. That they never think of the consequences.
And that's why you guys always lose.
The working people.
Yeah, fuck them, man.
But
Electric car charges. That's what the working people need.
Monsieur Bessner, what were you going to say? Do you agree? Is America doomed?
Well, this is what I was going to say. Yes and no. When we're talking about geopolitics, I actually think this thing could basically go on indefinitely. I think the creation of the all-volunteer force and the ever increasing technologization of war, which has been going on pretty much since war began, indicate that you actually don't need that many people to run this thing. And it's so disconnected from any form of democratic politics. You could kind of just maintain the bases indefinitely. So you could even have something like a general collapse at home. I mean, I don't think a total collapse, but I don't think that's on the table. Some sort of general collapse at home, and the empire abroad keeps on functioning. So I think that is, kind of complicating the American decline. I think it's clear that, domestically and socially and by all those indicators, things are not going great, to say the least. But, unlike Britain or unlike Rome, where you actually need people to, govern particular places abroad, the U.S. empire never relied on that. So you could have a lot of the imperial functioning. You could have dollar hegemony. You could have military hegemony pretty much indefinitely, I think. And so that's the unique thing about our historical moment. So I just wanted to lay that out there as sort of the base of my position. I don't know if Derek agrees or not.
Well, I would like to add, as we're talking about the companies that need our help right now, we should be thinking about defense contractors, some of whom lost, tens of millions of dollars a year when we pulled out of Afghanistan. So, I mean, let's be cognizant of the losses.
Moment of silence. I'm going to say moment of silence for the defense industry. Took that major
golf
L
courses all over
Afghanistan.
The Caymans are taking a huge hit right now.
That's
Tommy Bahama
exactly
stock
right.
is plummeting.
Yeah, I mean, some second and third
Beltway, I
mistresses
live,
have
like,
had their
outside
allowances
Seattle.
reduced.
Yeah, it's bad. I mean, people are struggling. You got CEOs of Raytheon out there with looking for their next rent check.
I have a question for our two guests. It's not like there hasn't been a crisis of capitalism before that people predicted as being the end of empire or the fall of America. This has happened before. And what happened before, to kind of jig it up, juice it up, was that we went into a global conflagration called World War II. And the question I have, because my firm belief is that empires are the sorest losers in the world. And if they go down, they're taking all the marbles, their cards, their toys with them, and will leave you with nothing. So my position is that before American empire lets itself goes down, they will smoke everyone before they let it fall apart.
Yeah, I kind of agree. Yeah, I don't know, Derek.
I mean, this is part of the reason. I agree with Danny broadly on this. I don't think the empire is going anywhere. I think what you're going to see is a retrenchment in some places, some particular spots of the world, like East Asia. I think, China is clearly on the ascendance, and the United States is going in the other direction. But overall, as long as the United States retains the capacity to destroy the planet, which we will never give up, the empire probably isn't going anywhere. And as Danny alluded to, the more we're able to fine-tune this machine and make it almost automated at this point, but certainly we've refined it to the point where the impact of maintaining this massive military doesn't really fall on that many people anymore. There's no general military conscription. We don't even really fight conflicts with a large number of troops anymore. We've kind of refined that down to special forces and mercenaries, contractors. We're moving even further in the direction of drones and other, totally automated weapon systems. So the less painful it becomes, the more we develop these technologies, the less painful it becomes for us to maintain this kind of power.
We don't really have a historical reference, though, recent times of what it would look like to have a mostly private military occupying different parts of the world. No one here on this panel thinks that's going to have some frightening effects.
I think it would, but I also think that the power elite don't care.
I understand that,
and I would say like we're probably closer than that than not. And to compare to is like when so Vietnam era, you're looking at 50-1 service members to contractors. And now that ratio has completely been reversed. So now we're seeing 2 contractors for every 1 service member. And this goes from everything from like food and just basic infrastructures of a base to like targeting, having actual, like missions and everything like that. Where you'll have a bunch of special forces maybe spearheading the effort to give it like actual like legitimacy, but the most of the troops around those special forces are just contractors, like fucking Eric Prince.
And let's be clear, this is not just an American tendency. We've seen the Russians deploy these private contractors.
Absolutely right. Yes.
And Turkey, people don't think about this, but Turkey basically its projection of military power over the last 5 years has been through Syrian mercenaries and private contractors. So this model is a model that is exportable. And I think as Daniel and Derek pointed out, because of the nature of the technology, you can insulate the population. Like one of the things I always say is like, one of the things the left should push for is conscription, because then the weight of warfare is felt by the entire society. One of the most deleterious effects of the Bush era was the fact that the cost of the war being fought in Iraq and in Afghanistan was completely divorced from the realities of Americans. So you did not have the same kind of anti-war movement that developed in the context of Vietnam.
Was it a different time though as well?
I mean, yes, it's a different time, but like the fact was, like, if you're a university student who's about to get conscripted and sent off to Vietnam, that's a big difference from when it's like, maybe I'll join the army.
A deferment. Well, let's be honest, you were getting a deferment and you weren't going anyway.
But also, I think that the move towards mercenaries is in some ways the neoliberalization of proxy tendencies that were there in the late Cold War, right? Yeah. The American conflicts in Africa and Central America especially were fought by local proxies. And now, instead of going to ideological parties or different local groups aligned with the goals of imperialism, you just buy it on the market. Somebody found an opportunity and then they filled it.
Well, I think it's really interesting because this particular phenomenon actually represents the sort of strange blend we find ourselves in. I think, Kuba, you're 100% right. It's neoliberalization. But of course, almost all of these soldiers are initially trained by the nation state-based American military. So what you effectively had is the blending. And I think this is, we on the left, we're not analytically good at this. I've been saying this for years now, but someone needs to really do a major book that examines how sort of the nation state-based security apparatus interacts with international capitalism. And I think this is a particular phenomenon of that, where you have basically the minor leagues of the special forces are the official, the uniform military, as we say, and then some, the best ones graduate to becoming mercenaries. So they're not totally disconnected from the American state. They actually reflect the fact that the American state since 1945 has been this strange agglomeration rather, of public and private, right? Where we essentially outsource our foreign policy thinking to think tanks. There's no Rand Corporation within the official state. So you have this strange public-private melding that is basically being seen in every aspect of our lives. And as it is usually, the security aspect is the last to be felt, because security is essentially considered the sine qua non of a state, going back to Weber, the organized monopoly of violence. But we're seeing it now. We're seeing like the apex of neoliberalism. So I just wanted to point that contradiction out.
That makes a very interesting and important point. I'd like to kind of contemplate a little bit more here, is that neoliberalism is actually a project that starts in the military-industrial complex and then shifts overall into American public society, generally, particularly after the New Deal Civil Rights Coalition kind of collapsed with the rise of Nixonian kind of, the Bretton Woods, a lot of the stuff we all know about, and going on to the Volcker shot, and the think tank, Rand Corporation, and the privatization of geopolitical planning is kind of the early forecaster of the neoliberalism that is to come. It's actually a nice little analysis that I've never really thought about, Bessner. So I give you props for that. Well, but I want to complicate the narrative, because I don't believe American empire is going down. I think that what will happen is that we're going to move in the direction of Britain, in the sense that we're going to be a one-party nation. And that one-party nation will be the Republicans. I think the Democrats are done. I don't even want to waste my time in terms of getting into that. It's going to move to the reactionary right, and I think they will be belligerent. And I think that they will try to start a military conflagration with China. As I've stated many times, Rand Corporation already has a white paper they published in 2016, War with China. I definitely see something that happening. We don't have to get into how that will turn out in the end. But my position is that we won't necessarily see a collapse of empire, but I do believe the internal social fabric and mechanism of American society may collapse. In other words, I don't think it's going to be a hard collapse like 1929. It's all over, because frankly, my position is that we're printing money to save capitalism right now. Quantitative easing, the Federal Reserve, the central banks are what's keeping capitalism functioning. Companies, the only reason why their stocks are profitable is because they're doing massive stock buybacks. When you have fictitious investment mechanisms like Bitcoin and cryptocurrency that are literally Ponzi schemes, that are churning millions of dollars into the economy, I believe that we've reached into a position right now in capitalism where it is so dislodged from practical economic reality, when you can create something like an NFT and make it a tradable item, that they will literally manufacture something or anything to keep this thing going. And if it does get bad, they might throw in either a little Keynesianism. If they get a little desperate, they'll even throw in some social democracy, but it will be done from the right, not from the left, because the Democrats and liberals are done. But what I do see is not the hard collapse of American empire. I see the internal social collapse of American society that will become much more stressful and distasteful for Americans. I see much more conflict. I see much more. I think that with the retrenchment against voting rights, I think regardless, I don't care. We don't have to have a debate. When we think about it, all types of notions of racial policy, of redistribution, and it's not redistribution, it's racial democracy, affirmative action, minority set-asides, all of that stuff that came out of the 60s, which created a black middle class and women in corporations, because let's make this clear, the greatest beneficiaries of affirmative action in America are white women. That's a fact. That's undebatable.
But
let me finish, Cuba. So what I see is that combine that with the crisis of masculinity discourse, the retrenchment against all of those policies is going to eviscerate certain middle classes, particularly middle classes of color, particularly the black middle class. You're going to start to see women getting seriously challenged in corporate and educational positions. In terms of this wokeness stuff will start to go away. Less women will be in positions of power as well. And the social fabric of America is going to become much more antagonistic. There will be more poverty, and depending on how generous the reactionary right will be, They may kick in some social democracy, expanded social welfare state to keep it going. I actually believe we are at a point where the right will be more willing to give us some form of social democracy than the Democrats and the left. And it will be a miserable country that will still be an empire, but it will still be keep going.
What do you think the right's going to give as far as social democracy when you have these companies like Zillow owning, tens of thousands of houses throughout the country?
I think a UBI was something that they wouldn't have a problem with.
They're rolling out
also-
here in California.
They might pay women to stay at home and look after children.
Yeah.
That's a classic sort of Christian democratic socialism from the left approach. But there's one big piece that I think we're missing in this conversation to sort of complicate it even further. It's not just a question of America, whether or not American imperialism and empire can continue. You have to think about what other powers and other countries are going to do and how they're going to react to the behavior that we've seen so far from, basically ever since George W. Bush. The leadership of the United States as a hegemon has been in question, even among countries that have done well out of the Cold War American-led order. And also what the adversaries of the United States are willing and able to do to push back, the opportunities that they can capitalize on. And putting aside the diplomatic and political side of the international environment, there's also the question of how much does the U.S. imperial machine rely on the international economy, and to what extent can it be hollowed out by things like supply chain crises, limited, having access denied to semiconductors and semi-finished technological goods, rare earth metals, strategic minerals, things like that. And I think that these are areas where the vapidity of American empire potentially hits a hard reality check. And that's how you get a recalibration of America's role in the world forced on it by economic or international political reality.
What do you
I
think,
think
Derek?
that the supplies, Cuba hits on another very important point, right? There are certain structural realities in the post-COVID environment that create a crisis of capitalism that I don't think was foreseen, which is inflation. Because now that we have these massive inability to get goods and services to people because of the supply chain problem, we have for the first time in 40 years, we have a potential inflationary crisis in the United States. Now, I think that capital is creative enough where they're going to find a way to remedy that and keep the system going by printing money to creating new vehicles to get goods and services transport. In other words, the supply chain problem is a perfect example of what's Naomi Klein's theory of when there's a crisis?
Disaster
happening?
Shock
capitalism.
doctrine.
Shock doctrine. In other words, the crisis of the supply chain right now causing inflation is actually a potential shock doctrine moment where capital can see this as a means of a job creation program, finance it, and do it in a way to actually save capital and save capitalism. And I think, quite frankly, it will be done by the right. Because I don't believe that the liberals or the left have the credibility, because you know why? The right doesn't care about getting tagged with economic chaos. Only liberals are insecure about that. Why? Because the tag of being financially irresponsible is always tagged to liberals.
What are your thoughts, Derek?
I think Kuba makes a good point about the supply chain and about the dependence really that the United States has on China to a large extent for things like rare earth minerals, for semiconductors. This is one of the reasons why I don't envision a war with China happening anytime soon, because the economies of those two countries are so intertwined. And this is one of the things that I push back against when you get people talking about the new Cold War and this sort of framework. It's much different than the conflict with the Soviet Union was, because the U.S. and China are so tightly bound together economically. You can't sort of separate them into competing camps like this. And I think the potential for the U.S. military to lose access to semiconductors, to lose access to rare earth metals in the event of a conflict with China is one of the things that will keep us from entering a conflict like that. Now, what it also means, probably moving forward, is that you will see, in addition to one of the things I think is going to be a big problem globally, in the coming decades, sort of regional conflicts over things like water and migration as climate change kicks in. One of the other drivers of conflict, and it may not be like a hot conflict, but sort of low-level conflict, will be the competition for these scarce resources to funnel into the military and to make sure that we can maintain technological dominance. So that will mean greater competition, sometimes violent, in Africa, in parts of Latin America where rare earth minerals predominate, and it will also mean funneling probably money into building a semiconductor industry that is outside of Chinese control, let's say.
And one thing that I think brings together the neoliberal element of military privatization and the role of the large contractors in the defense apparatus, as well as the dependence on China, is the extent to which when you have privatized your R&D functions, when you have privatized coding for software that's essential to military or intelligence operations, when you've privatized things like the F-35 program, and a gajillion different subcontractors are all feeding into it, with a lot of the talent pool that they need to draw on being based in East Asia, or East Asians that are trained in the West. I think that in any conflict with China, it would very quickly become apparent that a lot of the F-35s came pre-hacked, that a lot of the technology that the United States is depending on to fight China, because they lost control over the process by incorporating so many private companies into it, they have also lost the integrity of those systems. And they'll discover that the technology is unreliable, that China already knows how to counter it, and in many cases might just be able to take over or render assets inoperable. But that will come out in the regional conflicts where the peers that are able to fight informational and cyber war don't care, and it's more important for them to conceal their capabilities rather than intervene in what the United States might do in Somalia or Ethiopia or Sudan.
There's one silver lining here. My argument, and I do believe the reactionary right is going to take hold and try to do all these things, but my argument is the silver lining is this. I think that if the right fails badly in terms of their management, and their management could last 3 presidential cycles, 4, 8, 12 years, right? It can be a while. If they fail miserably, with or without a global conflagration, badly, I think that in that social instability, there will be so much potential chaos. You're going to see riots. You're going to see urban rebellions. You're going to see cops. There'll be so much instability. Let's say, for example, if their failure to maintain the system is economic in nature, another COVID crisis, or an economic crash, derivatives. No one's been talking about derivatives for years. That monster is still out there. Derivatives could crash. If they fail badly enough, I don't think anyone is going to be interested in giving the neoliberal traditional Democrats any credence anymore. But I think that will be the opportunity for something to the left of the actual Democrats. There could be progressives or social Democrats to possibly move America to the left. What I'm saying is that it will take a massive failure of the right-wing authoritarian project before this country is going to
But
be able to have
let me
a
ask
strong left.
Pascal. Let me ask this question to the panel then. Sorry, this is a question to everybody in the panel. Then, didn't we see the massive failure with COVID, and then the ensuing protests that happened pretty much all over the country?
Daniel, your sound is off.
Sorry about that, guys. I think this is really crucial, and this is like my major take on today. I think that what we have is a big contradiction. We have the institutions of mass democracy. We have mass political parties. We have the mass media. We have mass protests, thinking of that as an institution in the broad sense. But however, the way power actually functions is totally unrelated to any of these mass institutions. I think the U.S. state has very effectively carved itself a space totally outside of democratic politics in basically every issue area. So you could have massive protests, the murder of George Floyd protests. You go back, you could have anti-Iraq war protests, but the problem is that these are just not meaningfully connected to how power actually operates in this country. So this is the big disconnect, and why I think everyone's going a little insane is you have all these events that seem political, that in previous decades probably would have been political in the sense that they affect what's going on with power. However, there's nothing to affect this sort of power. And not only that, we have these new forms of technology, these social media things that make us feel like we're affecting the discourse, that this is a meaningful public sphere. We talk about nothing but fucking politics.
Agreed.
There's absolutely no connection between our talk or even our mass political actions and politics. So neoliberalism, defined here very broadly as sort of the individuation of everything, has affected politics ourselves. So that's why we're in this insane world where we talk about nothing but politics, we have things that seem political, and then nothing ever changes. And so this is the fundamental contradiction of our age, which presents an enormous problem to the left, because everything we do is premised on mass politics. But what if mass politics actually have no relationship to power? And I think that is my empirical normative understanding of where we are today.
I would follow up.
Daniel, I agree with you 100% that there is a mistake, especially in the internet world, where people mistake an audience for a movement.
Yeah, but my argument is premised on the fact that I don't think that the left comes back because they are organizing in the streets. I'm saying the collapse will be so bad and the desperation will be so bad that people will be demanding some kind of option otherwise after the right takes control. I'm not saying that there's going to be a movement, and what I'm saying is that there's going to be social dislocation in America when the right takes power. So much of it is going to be garbage because it's going to be online digital crap. So, and I agree with you, the George Floyd protest went nowhere. It's not like the 1920s and 30s where you had 1 million working class people.
But hold on. When we talk about the George Floyd protests, we always have to put it in context that it's not simply because of George Floyd. A lot of things go into that protest. The lockdown, first and foremost, is a big reason why. A hatred for Donald Trump is a big reason why. Absolutely. George Floyd wasn't even the only person that died, I think, in that month. That was big time news at that time. He just
Breonna Taylor.
Breonna Taylor, Ahmaud Arbery right before that. He just gets to be the face of this frustration. To me, what it was America's frustration with the failure of institutions in general. And to Daniel's point, and even to Pascal's point, I think that's why the protest went nowhere, because it was just and that's ultimately what it was. And when people tried to act like we're going to talk about this next Thursday on the show with a reporter that's been covering Minnesota, when people were trying to really lean into defunding the police and the city council responded with empty rhetoric, nothing happened in Minneapolis to defund or get rid of the police like they said they were going to do. And since then, it's not like more people are out in the street. They're not burning down more police stations. So no, I agree with the whole disconnect from a real movement. My question is, as we constantly see the failures of these institutions, and I understand power kind of doesn't care, at what point do we get a bunch of rebellions, not like George Floyd, and maybe even more violent? And that's what I'm seeing, because one thing that I do see living in California and in working with the unhoused is the growing population of homelessness. And there was one of the guys that lived at the studio that had taken pictures over a 5-year period of how large the homeless camp had gotten. And it went from 4 little tiny houses where the New York Times used to come every so often and interview the fucking architect that built the tiny houses for the little homeless lady and her dog in the rain, to over 200 people in an encampment, to the level that some people had fucking mailboxes on their encampment. And all the city did to shut up the business owners and the people was they put like a freeway rail there so people would stop hitting the ramshackle houses, and a porta potty.
I mean, I think this is an extreme. I want to sort of circle back to something Daniel said about the way that the American state has kind of created an armor around itself so that it is not really affected by popular protests and popular politics. Because when we look at George Floyd and what happened, the outcome of those protests was that the Democratic Party actually wanted to spend more money on police. And if we look at the crisis that takes place in capitalism, every institution seems to be losing legitimacy. Yet the Democratic Party and the Republican Party, the key organizational forces of the American state, are stronger than ever. Their ability to weather this crisis is extremely powerful. And in some respects, again, this is the contradiction, like the online world has helped sort of rebuild socialism as something that people at least talk about. But, it's kind of like talking about politics online. And I know we're doing this and I know we have podcasts and stuff like that, but it's like, watching porno and thinking you're a pickup artist, right? It's become a vehicle through which discontent can become commodified and sold and integrated into the capitalist system. So it's frustrating because the old methodologies of politics that Daniel mentioned, don't seem to be working in this real circumstance. Now, Pascal talks about a possible future of a collapse, which, yes, that may happen. But I think at the end of the day, how one weathers that collapse, even if the authoritarian right completely fails, is going to depend on, concrete organizational base of the left and how they overcome the political terrain that has emerged in the internet age and how they learn to deal with it. And I want to make one final point, which comes back to the war with China thing. I don't think we're going to end up with this huge war in China, partly for the reasons that Kuba and Derek outlined in terms of the supply chain structures. This is not a repeat of like World War, 1914. It's a different global system. There are nuclear weapons. I think, yes, proxy wars and things like that are more realistic. But I think another factor is that the American bourgeoisie, if we think of it as a class, is divided on the China issue because the commercial wing of the American ruling class wants to make deals with China, and the military-industrial complex. Insofar, there are maybe elements of it that wants war with China, but there are also cynical elements of it who they maybe don't really want a war with China, but the rhetoric of war with China is a good way to extract wealth from the population in order to purchase more useless weapons. So I think there's a lot of I think the type of conflicts we might see in the future are very much what happened in Syria, where you have private mercenary forces being involved, proxy wars, and things like that, where there are kind of rules of the engagement and not these big front wars, because the cost of those wars are just going to be too great for the ruling classes to contemplate. So that I think we'll be, in a pre-nuclear weapons age, you can envisage conquering a country. In a nuclear, when your opponent has nuclear weapons, right, you're not going to invade them. North Korea is there's all kinds of batshit crazy stuff. No one's talking about invading North Korea. Why? Because they have nuclear weapons, and North Korea is tiny. So if you look at someone like China, no one's good. I find it, we're not anywhere near the mode of global confrontation, but I do think, as Derek and Daniel have pointed out, we're going to be seeing a lot more of these Syria-type wars taking place across Africa with local players. Like when we look at the conflict that's taking place in Ethiopia today, I mean, people can weave a big imperialist story behind it, but the big drivers behind that is Egypt, which has its own national security reasons.
I agree with that.
To do things. So we're going to have this like chaotic. We're going to have these fortresses of stability surrounded by these chaotic proxy wars and failed states. I mean,
Gene, there's a point here you're bringing. I'm glad you mentioned Africa. Is that we can have a war with China, but not on China's territory. We can have a war with China in Africa.
And there's something that I wanted to talk about that ties in some of the elements that we've been discussing, things like the privatization and the insulation of the military-industrial complex from mass politics and from general social and economic forces inside the United States. And Pascal was talking about the possibility that you have, and as well as Jason, uprisings or other kinds of disturbances that might come about as a result of further decay within the United States. There are a couple of things here that I want to flag. One is that the left is very weak, like Daniel mentioned, on defense analysis and security issues. It's also weak inside the security apparatus. You don't have leftist police departments. You don't have leftist military units. You don't have, a squadron of helicopter pilots that would defect in case of an uprising. And if there are disturbances that really shake the American order, the advantage in a time period of crisis goes to people who already have training, access to weapons, already have organizational skills, and familiarity and comfort with violence. And that's on the right. This is going to be successors to elements of the security apparatus, internal and military, of the United States, as well as right-wing groups that obsess over militaria and militia issues. So if there is a general disturbance in the United States where that monopoly of violence is challenged, and it could very well come in the form of the bourgeois and the elite pulling back into defensive enclaves and letting a Brazil-type situation occur in the rest of the country where they're not going to bother to police it unless it affects their areas. That, while, that anarchic, that unstable, that sort of insecure environment will favor rightists if violence comes to be an issue. And the left, if we're serious about this, if this is a future that we want to prepare for, needs to either make inroads into the security apparatus of the state so that you do have police departments or military units that can defect, or it needs to start building up its own defensive capability for when it's open season on.
What do you think,
I
Daniel?
want to make a brief point because I don't want to be misread in terms of what I'm saying. I'm not saying that movements of protest against the reactionary right will either be effective or not be crushed while they're in power. I'm saying the movements won't happen while the right is in power, and if they do, they will crush them easily. I'm saying movements would happen if the right completely collapses and fails miserably during its one-party rule. Then I think there will be movements from disaffected people, even within their own cadre, to demand something different. Now, and I told you that all of my prognostications are all hinged on the right failing. What I actually do believe is that the right may not fail, because I also believe that the right would be more willing to implement social democracy than the liberals and the left to maintain their hegemony.
Do you consider?
If you read the statement from Josh Hawley from Djene State of Missouri, where he's talking about the crisis of masculinity. We've talked about this a million times.
The porn is too good.
That is going to be a global rallying cry of the right, and it already is, and it's going to work.
So
the interesting
my question.
Well, hold on, both guys. Let's put a pin in that. We have two guys here from American Prestige. Can we get the double D's, double dose of this pimpin', to address what Pascal is trying to say oh so passionately?
Yeah, I'll start very briefly, and then I'll hand it over to my man Derek. Well, I think broadly speaking, we've been in a period of leftist decline for over 100 years, and that the big moment when we could have created a new society was before World War One. I actually talk about that on this new podcast I'm doing with Matt Chrisman, Hinge Point. So if you want more of that take, you could go on. But I just don't see, to speak to Kuba's point, I just don't see any sort of Zapatista-esque movement coalescing or even, and certainly not succeeding. I just think that when you look at revolutionary situations, there are so it's such an extreme social collapse. Like if you look at 1917 Russia or 1918, 1919 Germany, or the various decolonial revolutions that have occurred after 1945. I mean, it's such an extreme social collapse that I don't think we're anywhere near in the United States. So I don't think that'll happen. I think that's actually reflected in what happened on January 6th. Like that was the closest we came, and that was basically, I think, a joke. As disturbing as it was to some people, I don't think that was anywhere near QAnon shaman getting in charge of an aircraft carrier. And I think that the American state is so powerful that it would essentially stamp anything that challenges it like that in a meaningful way. What you could see, but it's interesting, we might want to discuss why we haven't seen, is something akin to what happened between 1890 and 1914, where you get hundreds of European aristocrats, the nobility, killed. But to me, that's really just the final period on the bourgeois revolution that was begun by the French Revolution. It's interesting that we haven't seen those sorts of stochastic violence events in the United States in any meaningful way. There was a Steve Scalise, I believe that was his name, assassination attempt, but that's one. And if you compare it to previous historical periods, that's just very little. Just compare.
Can I ask a quick question then about?
Sure.
this?
Yeah.
So the question I have is isn't the fundamental difference that, when we talk about the rising violence in the late 19th century in America, but also across the world?
I'm thinking across the world.
Yeah, across the world, where we have assassinating American presidents, bomb attempts on the Ottoman Sultan.
Yeah, the SRs from Russia. Yeah,
all this kind of stuff. Isn't the fundamental difference actually that back then there wasn't cheap food and PlayStation? Today there's cheap food and PlayStation, and
fentanyl and drugs. I think you're going to see the legalization of sex work. I think you're going to see stuff like that increasingly. These types of opiates that just to keep the population at bay. We have cheap food, we have cheap drugs, we have cheap sex, and we have cheap video games and distractions.
Euthanize the masses.
That is a big difference.
Daniel, Derek, but would you?
Derek, sorry, you should go.
Again, this question is for both of you guys, but what do you think about, we're talking, turn of the century revolutions. Let's talk more so modern day 80s Philippines. It took them years, and they had January 6th like coup attempts that seemed funny until shit got real. So, and now you look at the Philippines with Duterte in power. This is a movement that takes years to happen.
Philippines is a very weak state. I mean, it's just not comparable meaningfully, in my opinion, to what the American state is able to do and has done.
I just wanted to make one addition to my final point about the Josh Hawley statement about the masculinity. And this is why I believe that the right will implement social democracy. What's more interesting than his obviously plea to a male insecurities, particularly white male, but it's going to be cross-racial because a lot of black and brown men are buying into it, is that one of the remedies he's saying is social democratic reform. Give people money to have families and have babies. Give people money to stop watching video games and porn, and create jobs for men so they can work and be production. I don't think that's productive. That's not irrelevant to me. And what I do believe is that to preserve their hegemony and empire, because no one's going to call them socialists, no one's going to call them lefties, no one's going to see, they're going to be using the "we're doing this to save American capitalism" stick. And they
I mean, they're already called white supremacists, and it isn't hurting them. So,
right. And one of the things I found fascinating watching people like Peterson, even what's the guy from Louisiana, the right wing, the all right guy, what's his name? I forgot his name. I found it fascinating after Biden won how many of them, as much as they talk about the Marxists and socialists, all of them started incorporating rhetoric about the importance of social democratic type programs to ameliorate the suffering of people, of their people. Like, yes, we need to have jobs.
Donald Trump did the same thing when he was on the campaign trail. Derek, would you like to chime in? Pascal's talking too much.
No, he's dropping some good stuff. So
look, man, we brought you white guys on here because whenever black guys talk, white people go, "Are you guys talking about black shit?" And it's
wait. Does this mean that the house white guys aren't good enough?
So we need white guys on here, and then the black guy can talk.
I mean, I view a lot of these questions of collapse and sort of what's coming down the road increasingly through the lens of climate change, which brings its own crises, but is also a multiplier of all the things that we're talking about here. It makes inequality worse. It makes displacement and homelessness worse. It makes conflict worse. We've talked about the potential for conflicts over things like rare earth minerals or semiconductors, but what we're looking at is a future of conflicts over things like water. You guys mentioned Ethiopia. Egypt's interest in Ethiopia is partly fueled by water because of the Grand Ethiopian Renaissance Dam and the impact that they're afraid that may have on the Nile. We're seeing border clashes in Central Asia, not fueled by governments, by people who are struggling to struggling over control of water resources. Major lakes are drying up in Turkey. Major rivers are drying up in South America, completely drying up, destroying entire sort of ways of life and ecosystems. The possibility of a conflict, not between the U.S. and China, but between India and China over aquifers in the Himalayas is looming larger and larger every time they have a border clash. And I feel like when we talk about collapse over the rest of this century, what we're going to be talking about is not the collapse of political systems or the collapse of left or right. It's going to be the collapse of the basic systems on which people rely to survive. It's going to be questions of where's the food at? Not food prices are too high, but where is the food? We can't grow it in places that we used to grow it before. Where's the water coming from? Where am I going to get the next glass of water to drink?
The Road situation, that movie, The Road.
Yes.
This is going to
be as sudden as all that, but it's we're already seeing this stuff happening. And to be sure, the United States is the last place that's going to really be affected by this.
Exactly.
In the United States and like Western Europe are the last places where these impacts are really going to hit, but they will come. They will eventually hit. And it's going to be, I think, through the collapse of these basic systems and the need for people to work together just to survive day to day that is going to have the greatest impact on, what our politics, to the extent that you think of that as politics, look like by, let's say, 2100.
I just want to add something. Yeah, I was going to add. This is literally what the Syrian civil war was about. The Syrian civil war was driven by climate change. I remember in the years leading up to the Syrian civil war, the conditions in Syria were so bad that the nomadic groups were bringing their animals to Iraqi Kurdistan. It was like a big deal at the time. The tribes were bringing their animals to Iraqi Kurdistan to have water and food. And the question is going to be, and there's a great book called The General Crisis, which talks about the 17th and 18th century and the environmental change, is that there were societies that had political structures that allowed them to weather that crisis better than others. Japan was a good example of a society that was able to weather the climate change that took place in the 17th and 18th century better than, for example, Western Europe, which was a bloodbath, right? Or the Ottoman Empire, which basically imploded. And I think the Syria, obviously, there's the economic base for the Syrian conflict was this environmental crisis and drought that was affecting Syria, exacerbated by Turkey's damming policies and things like that. But what made it worse and aggravated it was the political system and the sectarian system that made the stakes worse. So it really is, to Derek's point, we're going to have a question of socialism or barbarism.
It's not just Syria. I mean, the entire Arab Spring really was fueled in part by climate change, and then sort of the knock-on effect as these revolutions took place. But I would add to that another place that we is where we see environmental impacts fueling conflict. The entire sort of Sahelian band across Africa right now is increasingly sort of the locus of conflict between groups that are predominantly herding societies and predominantly farming societies who are being shoved closer and closer together on smaller and smaller amounts of arable land with fewer and fewer water resources, and it's one of the things that multiplies conflict in that region.
And while the band of territory that is ecologically strained to such a point that conflict can emerge might be limited at the moment, the effects of these types of resource scarcities and the conflict that goes around with it is refugee flows that move not from the conflict zone to the most convenient place, but often, if you're going to be a stateless refugee, go to Europe. Or if you're in Central America, go to the United States, because there are resources there in greater abundance where you could potentially find refuge and start a new life. And those refugee movements, when they become large enough, then become destabilizing phenomena of their own and become the vehicle through which that localized ecological catastrophe becomes a regional or global security issue. And I'm not blaming the refugees. One of the Djene pointed out that in periods of crisis, the political structures, social structures, the economic structures of societies determine how vulnerable they are to it. Well, one way that you can resist this type of instability is you shoot all the refugees. You don't allow anyone in. Another is you allow people in and you have systems to assimilate them. You have systems to settle them. Now, whether you might have an able state in the sense that you're capable of responding, but then if the society doesn't have enough coherence to decide, okay, we're going to invest in accommodation or we're going to invest in exclusion, that political cleavage becomes a vehicle for that instability to reach the core.
I think Kuba's making a very important point. In terms of the environmental factor, particularly the water, I think that what our guest is saying is right on point, but I'll be very frank. The American ruling class and the European ruling class won't care, because I'll be very honest. The only thing they will care about is the refugees. If those black and brown people die, they'll see that as an advantage because they can go in and take their resources and not have to fight them. So that's not going to motivate the ruling class. The only thing that's going to motivate them is the fear of the refugee crisis. And the debate will be, do we just kill them or we just create structures where they have them be the new underclass in our societies? But the motivation of, that's why I think believing that climate change is going to be the pivot that causes the ruling class to wake up, I don't think that's going to be the case. I think they're going to try to monetize it, green new jobs and all that shtick. But I don't think they're going to really seriously take it seriously, particularly if it's coming from the reactionary right. And they're going to be like, if those people die, that's great. That means we don't have to fight for their resources.
Green New Deal is a hashtag.
And so it's
their own fault that they're dying, right? They didn't look after their environment. They didn't have the sane economic policies. They're not sending their best. They're drug dealers. They're rapists. They're Muslim. And of course, they're black and brown, right? But this will be applied to Ukrainians and Belarusians and white ethnics as well.
What were you going to say, Daniel? Sorry.
Oh no, it's okay. I mean, I think just this conversation it just shows that we are just in a world where the working class didn't become conscious of itself. And like basically what do we do with that reality? I don't know. I really don't know. It just seems like a bunch of shitty options that are kind of equally shitty. There's not even a less shitty option really, and I think this is why we're all going insane. Like the hope was that Bernie would maybe lighten the neck, the boot on the neck of the working class, at least in this country, and that didn't happen. So I think there's just this despairing tone to everything we're talking about, because there's really nothing to do absent that fundamental historical thing that Marx said was supposed to happen and didn't.
Derek, do you have anything more positive to say, perhaps? Like, that was a pretty heavy down.
Derek, hold on. Can you hold on for 1 second? Gene made a mistake because he doesn't see me here, so he was trying to run the show because he's got a tie on. He doesn't understand that the white guys have talked too long because we have a white guy talking meter. And it goes over. And Kuba interrupted Daniel, and Kuba didn't get the memo that two white guys can't interrupt each other unless it's
white on white violence.
All
It's
right.
white on white
Yeah,
crime.
Oh my God,
That's
I'm
ugly.
sorry. I violated white solidarity.
You
I
did.
apologize, brother.
So someone said this in the chat, and before I let Marcus make his point, someone said this in the chat, and I really need Daniel and Derek to do this because these are the white men that could do this as a joke. You guys are hearing it first. It would be a joke, but I think these guys could actually get it published because they can have serious white faces that would make people think they're being serious. Anglo-pessimism. I think you need to start a theory on Anglo-pessimism and really lean into being serious about it. And it will be the biggest inside joke you've ever seen. That's some Andy Kaufman level shit right there.
Derek, are
white
you
Honda.
Irish? You're Irish, right, Derek?
I'm a whole bunch of things, mostly German. I'm sort of like
Mostly German.
Joe
okay.
Biden in that I'm probably mostly German, but I like
Claim
to highlight
Irish.
the little bit of Irish that I have. Yeah.
What about you, Daniel? Where are your folks from?
Oh, Jewish, Russia, the Pale.
Oh, the Pale.
Settlements, yeah. Western Ukraine, Brest-Litovsk, back in the day, 1700s.
So a German
welcome.
and a Jew leaning into Anglo-pessimism is going to be the greatest thing to happen to academia since bell hooks.
Anglo excellence.
I think there's
Marcus.
a lot of things that we've kind of hit on that. I think it deals with any type of military intervention or military operations with China. I think mostly Mikey is gonna this is gonna something that's going to happen off of any mainland for either of these countries, and I think Africa is probably a solid fucking option. But at the end of the day, even with the technology that allows the military to function as it does now, is actually somewhat separated from the conduction of warfare itself. And the F-35, the littoral combat ship where they made 6 of them and then discontinued them already. These are hugely expensive projects that do expand the military industrial complex, more of economy, but don't actually do anything to expand warfare capabilities. And I think you get up till the drone program, that gives them some actual extra movement. But as far as the F-35, largely ineffectual to this day as anything that's helpful operationally. And with that, it's mostly the complex that's now driving itself. It comes from the neoliberalism of these different think tanks and saying, no, these are the things that we need. And I think one of the last military programs that was built off of hey, what do the actual people on the ground need? It was the A-10 Warthog, built decades and decades ago, which they're actually trying to completely push out. Going to Cuba's point though of anything that would actually be able to push back would actually need some large scale military equipment. And I agree. And that's where I think when Pascal's talking about the inter-tearing of the social fabric. I think the left has a very small fucking chance to possibly get into some positions in which you would have some military apparatus, and I think a governorship, in which case the National Guard would be, and like with that though, it's like assuming too that most of the people who operate under that state would have the same mentality as the voting populace that elects said governor. And Minnesota, going back to Minnesota, there's a continued push though, with like pushing back against police, the police violence, the structure of the police department. And it was another loss, right? Not to go back into the doomerism, but there was a referendum to get rid of the police department and initiate a public safety department. That did fail, but the people who were behind that movement, really did a good job of recognizing why it did fail, recognizing that certain campaigns that were levied to
the entire
discredit
city council said they were on board. How does that fail when the entire city council says they're on board?
It was the people were voting for it. It was and that's where too of it was like a public referendum.
I mean, the headlines of the LA Times today, Daniel, I don't know if you saw the LA Times this morning, is that one of the schools in Los Angeles that defunded their police, they had police in the schools, they said they want the police back in the schools.
Really? Where was it? Where was the school?
It's somewhere in SoCal. I'll let me look where.
Not in the city though. Not in LA. It's not like Glendale or something.
No, there's no police
no cops in Glendale High.
Just Armenian revolutionaries.
I mean, Pomona. I didn't know there was police in schools in Pomona. I did not know Pomona was that bad.
I would teach at Pomona, Gene. That'd be a pretty sweet job, right? Pomona College.
Yeah, why not? Like near the beach. I mean,
yeah,
I can't complain about Missouri, but I love.
Oh, you can. You choose not to.
I mean, I always say, as someone that went to a high school outside of where I grew up without police in my school, I was able to do things that normal kids do, like get in fights and cut class and yell at teachers and not get a prison record. So police in schools is a very frightening thing, in my opinion, because my friends.
It's horrible. It's horrible.
It's truly insane.
It's all over Florida, baby. All over Florida.
Does the NYPD have a special school unit? They do, right?
They did.
Yeah, they did. They got rid of that. Okay, I remember
I
that.
thought they reallocated funds. A lot of that shit was, we all know this. It's the moving around of money. But I was just bringing that up because, again, we're going to have Marcus. You're more than welcome to come on the show Thursday if you like. We're going to have a journalist who's been covering Minneapolis for years, and he's been watching our show and kind of likes the discourse we have around defund the police, because there is kind of a media perception of what really is happening and what is really happening on the ground. And as we're seeing, and Pascal talks about this all the time, is that people that live in these crime-ridden areas don't necessarily want their police departments defunded. And Eric Adams winning mayor in New York on a very strong ticket of tough on crime, let's bring back stop and frisk. Again, LA Times did a great article on how people without cars, they can't afford cars, usually immigrants, are getting stopped and questioned on bicycles. So the sheriff's department, I believe, was like 85% of their stops were people on bicycles. Just because they were riding a bike. I mean, think about that. And Daniel, you live down south in LA, in an area where they're constantly making more freaking bike lanes because they want people to ride bikes. You're telling me that you're criminalizing certain people that are riding bikes?
Yeah, funny how that happens. What a shock. No one could have predicted that one.
One thing that Matt Taibbi did really well in his book on Eric Garner is point out the profit center motivation, the transformation of police into revenue generating organizations, and how it serves as another point of extraction, even more racist and even more exploitative than what goes on in the private economy, because police deliberately target the people they consider to be the most vulnerable when they need to hit their quota of infractions, tickets, and fines.
Well, you know what the solution is. I came up with the solution to the police problem and the gang problem and everything. What we need to do is we need to adopt the policies of the Sunni awakening policy in Iraq, and we need to basically pay the gangs to become the security force and give them all jobs.
And to kill Shia.
And to kill, to set up a gang militia in. I'm telling you, that's going to be that's where the policy is going to end. They're going to have a woke version of that where it's going to be, we're going to pay.
There's going to be a crypt IPO.
They had a version of that in Haiti. What they called it, the Tonton Macoute. Didn't work out too well.
Yeah, but it's a good way to at least get the gangs to shoot the people that the government wants them to.
Yeah, or you could end up with Jamaica situation where you've got the rival gangs just supporting the rival parties and just them going back and forth.
Can you imagine the Democratic Party militia? It's going to be like all blue-haired, like the Democratic Party militia.
I think that's the false flag though. The Democratic Party militia is going to be mostly of like the Karens. That's
Ugg boots and Starbucks cups.
Yes. Yep.
Are you ready for the Democratic? Derek, would you be ready for the Democratic Party militia?
I'd be fascinated to see what collection of Rand Corporation research assistants they put together for something like that. Speaking as a former Rand Corporation research assistant, I would be fascinated. Oh yeah, many years ago.
Deep state credentials there, buddy. Whoa.
That's right.
I mean, I was part of the military-industrial complex, but god damn.
Like Pascal has all these like deep state operatives around him. It's all Pascal's handlers. He's too hot to handle. So they have to send Marcus. Just in case he needs to. Be silenced.
Once you start getting too popular with Pascal, I'm sorry, got to put you down.
Yeah, and then Marcus steps in his place.
The Mau will happen one way or the other.
The Karen militia is between Anglo-pessimism and the Karen militia. I think Daniel and Derek need to write the greatest Jacobin article ever about the Karen militia and Anglo-pessimism.
But it really tells you something that you can envisage a Republican Party militia, like people who would go and murder people for the Republican Party. Not everybody, but there are people. But you just can't imagine anyone ride or die for the Democrat Party.
Imagine Antifa or some kind of Black Panther organization in that role, but it's entirely fanciful. Right.
The closest the Republicans are going to get to that is Black Panther 2 and all of the
Electric Boogaloo.
That's
black people that go there and dashikis. That's going to be as close.
But that on January 6th though, they did murder a cop. That was who was all. You got a QAnon group of fucking psychos that murdered a cop who was also a QAnon psycho. These motherfuckers are ready to go.
See, I think I disagree with that. I mean, I think one of the major preconditions of fascism was that military experience. And I think the irony is that by basically ensuring that there's been generations of Americans who haven't fought wars, which is unique in world history, there's really no fear of any sort of organized militia movement. Again, I think you could have stochastic things like the Vegas shooting, the shooting in Pittsburgh, the various things like that. But in terms of organized thing, there's no base for a Freikorps or an Iron Prince. If we're going to,
there's not a mass base, but there are veterans from Iraq, from Afghanistan, and right now a lot of them become contractors. But the ones that go home, that is it's a very small segment of the population, but they are people who have that training, have that esprit, have that mentality, and often have that politics. And because
I don't think
they're
there's
not
enough
pushing,
basically.
That may very well be. But also, the fact that there's contractor jobs for them is a really big difference. If the Freikorps could have just gotten six-figure salaries putting down natives in Namibia, then you wouldn't have had to deal with them in the streets of Berlin.
So what about the Oath Keepers? There's an Oath Keeper. I stay out here by the beach currently, and there is an Oath Keeper RV and there's all this crazy shit written all over their RV. And and I want to take a picture of it so bad, but I'm afraid if I take a picture, they're gonna shoot me. But one of the things on the RV, it says BLM, Biden loves miners.
Oh wow.
I think the Oath Keepers are probably,
like coal miners.
I think the Oath Keepers are much more dangerous than the what is it, Boogaloo Boys, the bad boys, what do they call the
Boogaloo Boys, the those guys. It's just
who
like
the guys that Trump shouted out?
Proud Boys.
Proud Boys.
Yeah, I think
Proud
the
Boys.
Oath Keepers, people talk about the Proud Boys are a joke. The guys who I think who are seriously dangerous are the Oath Keepers. Cops, former military. That's all. I mean, come on.
I think one of the concerning things too, though, is that and someone actually brought it up in chat is who do some of these, especially like someone like Eric Prince, like where does his trained militia group, where do the people that he's got connections to, and also has like this person that's access to a fucking arsenal.
Well, one thing I would agree with Daniel on, like I don't find the like, is it fascism or is it not fascism debate like very helpful because we're dealing with like very specific historical conditions, and yes, there's like a very big difference between America today and Germany in the early 1930s. So whether we call what's happening today fascism, post-fascism, neo-fascism, or just reactionary right politics is kind of, it's just a semantic game. What I do think is the case, though, is that unlike in Germany, the American state does not require a Freikorps to enforce itself. Like the reactionary right doesn't need these people. They have the police forces. They have the regular things. They don't need that stuff. And America is not like Germany in the sense that you conquer the capital city, you seize power, and then you control the whole country. America is an empire. Things are very dispersed. And I think one of the ways that the reactionary right, to Pascal's point, will maintain power is not simply through imposing its rule across the entire country, but allowing liberal bastions like New York, California, Washington State to exist. You can still get abortions, you can still have blue hair, but taking a tight grip on national politics and enforcing a very reactionary agenda across the country. They don't need jackasses like the fucking Oath Keepers causing trouble from them as they're consolidating power. I think the reason that some Republicans were pissed off about the January 6th was like, we don't need these motherfuckers. Like, we'll just make the next election through perfectly legal judicial means.
I got news for you. Let me tell you right now. If people think they're going to be safe in New York or the Northeast or the California, I got news for you. The New Jersey gubernatorial election. Don't believe it. The cops right now in New York are now saying, I'm anti-vax mandate. All right? What I'm saying is that the notion that the reactionary right is only going to be a southern red state phenomenon, I think people are deluded with that. Because there are a lot of urban white ethnics in New York, in New Jersey, in Rhode Island, who got no problem with Trump. And by the way, there are going to be a lot of black and brown people who might be like, I hate this vax stuff, or for other reasons, tired of the Democrats. They didn't hook us up. They didn't give us what we want, or we'll just stay home. And you might see a Republican take over a state like New York. If he can take over New Jersey, why can't he take over New York?
It's pretty Trumpy where I'm at here in California.
Yeah, I'm agreeing with you. Listen, Jason, let's think about this. Let's be for real. Blue California was literally just trembling because that right-wing Negro clown was possibly going to be governor.
Well, I think there's issues though, like where I think most of the Democratic Party, I think going into 2022, and like the Democrats just are fucking ineffectual, paid opposition, shitty at politics. Choose your reasoning. Well, and I mean, I think it just depends on the location and what size. But what I'm saying though is that like some of this things as far as like moving forward, I think you are going to end up with an expansion of left politics with an overall decrease of the Democratic political structure.
You know the only thing the Democrats are good at? You know what the only thing the Democrats are good at, because that's their job? You know what it is? Can I tell you what it is? Crushing the left.
Yeah.
India Walton, Nina Turner, the progressives that all the Jacobin DSA types said we're going to change the world, got all of their sexual genitalia cut. With this infrastructure.
Oh, that's very heavy.
I think the most important structural thing about the Democratic Party now is the class of consultants who essentially get a ton of money to run races that they're guaranteed to lose. That really only exists on the Democratic side, and I think that's the most important structural transformation the party's experienced in the last 30 years. And I think barring some like gigantic structural change, that'll continue. And it's just basically, it's hard for me to get worked up around because we've just totally lost so much. I'm all about hashtag content now. That's that, shoot me up with heroin and put me in the car with the pedal to the metal into the brick wall of climate change. Because I don't see anything changing without some sort of structural transformation, which I think is essentially impossible.
I mean, the Lincoln Project was the transfer of those consultants from the Republican Party to the Democratic Party.
Yeah.
What do you think, Derek? Are we doomed?
I think you guys are both right. I think that the better way to think about the Democratic Party institutionally, rather than thinking of it as a political party whose objective is to win elections, it's a think tank and a media funnel. Basically, it's a way to take donor money and distribute it to media consultants, and it's a place for 25 30-year-old kind of suburban and urban to some extent well-off nerds to go find work. At the same time, I do think the structures of a political party exist within the democratic institution, and I say that because they snap to incredible effect anytime the party needs to kind of put down a left insurgency or a left uprising or kind of smack down any movement left. So I think the muscles are still there, but they don't get exercised.
Listen, I've been saying for years, the function and purpose of the Democratic Party is to neutralize any politics to its left, to coalesce with the right, period.
And the thing is, like, I don't think there's any real disagreement in there. I think the thing is, though, is that, and when we were talking about even like the Congressional Progressive Caucus holding up the bill for this, for the Build Back Better agenda, it's the first time in decades any coalition left of center held up any type of processes. What did that get us? Like literally nothing. Like at this point, it literally got them nothing. But that's just recognizing that, hey, this is a point of something that had happened for the first time in a long time, and that's what I think is like 2022, Democrats are going to get absolutely demolished overall. I could see an increase in like the quote unquote squad within that shrinking democratic structure. But that's the thing is like this is largely driving to what I think I agree with Pascal is that the Republican Party dominates, and
it's funny
what the reaction to that hopefully could be a resurgence of the left, but stay tuned.
Look, man, the third
Republicans are friendlier to AOC and squad type progressives, leftists, call them what you will, than the Democratic establishment, because the Republicans find them extraordinarily useful foils. But the Democrats would prefer to extirpate them.
Not just that, but like you look at local Democratic Party, and I'll tell you from Springfield, it is, and I've said this before, it's like boomer, like feminists, their doctor partners, and whenever anyone tries to run, they will wheel out like people on the verge of death to vote for their thing, to maintain their control over it. It's like, it's a therapy group. It's a therapy group for these professional managerial classes on a local level to feel morally superior to the hoi polloi and the reactionary elements in their, of the local gentry. Like you have this professional managerial elite of university professors and doctors living in small town America who despise the business elite, that the rapacious business elite that runs the small towns. And then they never want to win power. They just sit there and hold on to the apparatus of the Democratic Party. But number two, and I'll push back on Pascal's point, I do not believe the Republican Party is actually capable of doing this social democracy politics. I think they can adopt some of the rhetoric, but I think that libertarian brain melt is so fucking powerful amongst the American right compared to where you have national conservatives in Europe like the Tories or Orban who will do this kind of stuff. I think the ideological hegemony of libertarian absolute capitalist nonsense will mean that this populist social democratic stuff that they say will only ever be a rhetorical flourish. Maybe they'll give you money to keep your wife at home. Beyond that, I don't think the American right is is of doing those kind of politics.
You get the first step back.
Unless Romney takes over the party. Like that is the Romney politics.
Hold on, let Kuba answer.
What about the Republicans printing money, giving it to large employers like Walmart, McDonald's, you name it, and paying them to basically insert their own labor force, giving them that kind of like basic social democratic package at the cost of severe curtailment of freedom by employers, which is already part of the Republican playbook.
What do you think, Derek?
I mean, I think that's an interesting possibility. There are ways to get around, discontent, and I think that could be one of the trade-offs that gets made. You sort of, let's say, trade the $15 minimum wage for, you get to have a company store and kind of insert yourself in the lives of your workers. I was thinking we need Bismarck to like come back from the dead and take over the Republican Party. Because he got it. I mean, he got this sort of the need for a safety valve to kind of give people a standard of living that avoids unrest or at least minimizes it.
I have a rebuttal to Djene's position, and this is why I disagree with it. How effective were the libertarians at stopping Trump from giving people $2,000? They were not. They couldn't do it. I'm saying it depends. It depends.
I don't think they cared that.
No, I don't think they cared that much. They don't care. But I think
no. Your argument is that ideologically certain things are beyond the pale for them. That goes against their ideology. What I'm saying is
Pascal, hold on. Let me tell you, Pascal. Let me tell you. You've been interrupting everybody all day. Let me tell you. First Step Act is what you get from the Republicans. That's not social democracy. That's rhetoric, and it does nothing for the disproportionate amount of Black and brown people that are locked up in prison. It has done nothing. And that was trumpeted as this great piece of legislation that was going to change the way we look at incarceration. So, gotcha.
And a $2,000 bribe is not the same as making some kind of like long-term policy. Like I think they might be willing to like do an emergency measure, like dump some cash in the economy, but to do any kind of structural change, I think is beyond them, because I think the power of this like capitalist ideology in America is so powerful on the right that it stymies their ability to go fully national conservative.
I heard another rebuttal. Quote from Adolph Reed. We got more from Nixon than any Democratic president that came after him.
Why did we get more from Nixon? Come on, man. Context.
Yeah, this was a
movement pushing him to do all that. He didn't wake up one day and say this is a great idea.
But he did it to preserve the order of society.
So
in a Cold War context where the New Deal coalition was still viable.
My position is this: in order to preserve the order of society, the reactionary right would do it.
I'm skeptical that they have the ideological infrastructure to do it.
Well, it's not just ideological, but the state has also been hollowed out. So if you want to have an ambitious program, if it's going to be administered through the state and not through predatory contractors, you're going to have to hire more cadres. You're going to have to train up and make bureaucracies that the Republicans despise effective. Maybe you can do that, but I think you go through the contractors and they steal everything and ruin the program and make it ineffective.
Yeah. No, and I think that's, you see that with like the PPP is like exactly what Kuba is talking about. This like huge bill that's supposed to give money to small businesses. It goes through for-profit banking structures where most small businesses don't have a relationship with, and then most of the money goes into huge corporations.
Well,
that have a ton of small businesses. But I would say like that's where too of like right now you've got Djene in not encouraging but willing to do some stuff on postal banking. That's like I don't know. It's possible that but highly unlikely, because like Romney. If Romney was like the ideological strength in the Republican Party, I could see that happening a whole lot more. But the libertarian brain rot is.
Let me make another rebuttal, if you will indulge me.
Yeah,
Barack Obama was proposing at a point in his presidency to cut Social Security. This was a major initiative that he was going to go through. People remember when that was on the table that he wanted to do?
I remember when it was on the table with Bush Jr. I remember when it was on the table with Reagan. I literally remember that.
They were Republicans. Do you know what stopped Barack Obama from being able to cut Social Security?
The
Republicans, not the Democrats.
That doesn't mean the Republicans are gonna. That doesn't mean the Republicans are going to implement social democracy, even in a crisis. I mean, I don't know. I'm just very skeptical about their ability to overcome like the hegemony of kind of libertarian capitalist ideas on the right. Like Marcus, I have a friend who works in a bank and who told me like the PPI, like people were just stealing that money. Like it's like if you knew how to game the system, he was like they were like, don't even check things properly, just fucking loot the thing. So there'll be opportunity. Like Pascal, I agree. The right will give opportunities for like the small town American bourgeoisie, the people who dress in camo hats but live in McMansions, give opportunities for them to like loot state assets and state money. But like any kind of meaningful sustained program, I don't think they're capable of doing it, because beyond just maybe giving money to keep women at home.
And I'll say to that point too, is that largely the person that was building the PPP program was Susan Collins, who, like Romney, represents a type of Republican that is like dying quickly. And so, I mean, I don't know. And I think that like they might attempt to, but it would be a complete and utter
privatizing
failure.
Social Security actually goes into your whole point, Pascal, about a 50-year counter-revolution, because the privatization of Social Security has been a talking point kind of sort of on a bipartisan level for some time. So bringing up Barack Obama to me means nothing, because Bush Jr. was talking about it. Definitely Reagan talked about it as well. So my question is, what is your fucking point?
Reagan saved Social Security. That's a fact. His reform saved Social Security.
Okay. How do you save Social Security?
Because he actually extended the capacity to pay into the program to actually disperse payments. Check it out.
Okay.
Look at Reagan's amendments to Social Security in the 80s. That's a fact. No one can deny that.
Okay.
What do our guests think? The Prestige Boys.
In terms of whether the Republican Party will go national conservative.
Yeah.
I mean, just looking at the history, this has been like a uniquely anti-natalist country. So there's not much to build on historically about where that would come from. And also the sort of federalism gets into it. And I think that the problem that the Republicans have is that they don't want black or brown people to essentially get the benefits of those sorts of policies. So maybe something like that could happen at a state level. And then they could structure it in such a way where the quote unquote right people are having babies, but a pro-natalist policy that could result in, more ethnic
White
minorities.
genocide. White
becoming
genocide. Call it what it
majoritarian.
is.
Whiskey gravy.
Yeah, it doesn't seem like that would be a policy that Republicans could embrace, at least at the national level.
Well, one possibility, thinking of my own experience working in Washington, the one part of the federal bureaucratic apparatus that Republicans like is the CBB and Homeland Security. That was where, putting aside the Department of Defense, that was where Trump poured in a lot of money, and that's where you had federal employees that were cadres for Trumpism. So I could imagine potentially building up the Department of Homeland Security even more with an ideological screen, and then using that to vet who gets benefits.
What do you think, Derek? You were going to say something.
I think one of your commenters just put up a quote from Milton Friedman, and this is what I was thinking here. I mean, there is a tradition in libertarian thinking of talking about a universal basic income or negative income tax that I think could gain some purchase within the Republican Party. I don't know that. It would certainly have to be in exchange for gutting the social welfare system as it exists now. They wouldn't just add it on to what exists now, and it would have to come at a sort of net loss, I think, for the worse off among us. But I think it could gain some traction. Could it actually, gain enough support within the Republican Party to become a serious policy proposal? I don't know. I find the Republican coalition to be almost as incoherent, really, if you drill into it. If you actually look at who comprises the base of that party, I find it to be almost as incoherent as the Democrats. It's just that they're able to organize more effectively, and they have certain core key issues that seem to draw them together better than the Democrats are able to do. But so I don't know. I think if there is going to be a change here, if the Republicans are going to adopt anything along these lines, I think it would be something like that. It would be something like UBI. But I don't know. I don't know that you can.
Can I just piggyback on Derek for a second, as one white man interrupting another white man? I think that what we could see is a UBI, because I think the structures of capitalism are pushing in that direction. Why do I say that? I think the United States has essentially created a globalized system. It stands atop of a hierarchy, and it relies on the whole system functioning through its consumption. So if Americans actually begin to decrease in their consumptive habits, some juice needs to be put in the system. And I think Pascal is exactly right. You see that through quantitative easing. And so I think actually that a recession like 2008 and 2009 is not possible anymore, because that was based on real decline in real estate values. I think the system, whether consciously or not, would now just pump money through the entire thing to make sure that doesn't happen. I think that's what we've seen precisely in COVID, where the stock market has gone up and real estate prices have gone up, which is really insane. So I think there's now a total disconnection from the a real material economy. But however, this whole thing is still premised on American consumption. So you could get a UBI if the powers that be, or the algorithm, which has become conscious, essentially needs to juice consumption. So something like that is possible, in my opinion.
I mean, you could actually attach it to an antinatalist policy package and make it a kind of narcotized, sedated euthanization of the surplus population.
Oh man!
And also, I was gonna say with the UBI, that's like the reason why even like Andrew Yang and it's like building popularity is that even within like the libertarian like sphere, the idea that like utilizing this as a more efficient way of doing like welfare, having like a security state, that's kind of like I think from their understanding, even built in of like, hey, this is how we get rid of some of the government apparatus that we don't like. And then at that point, it's just waiting to dwindle and then eventually turn off the UBI.
Oh God, I had the vision now where they say you can have money, but then if you have that money given to Amazon, you get more Amazon credits to buy things.
Oh,
or
yeah.
you get money for your Steam account, so you can get more video games.
Affirm. What do you guys
That's
think?
grim.
Of Affirm?
Yeah, like you get they
Affirm?
give you a UBI of like Amazon food delivery, DoorDash. You get DoorDash food delivery and Steam video game account money.
Yeah, so
but
like you
have
get
guys
$100
seen Affirm?
in UBI, but you can purchase like $150 of DoorDash credit or something. Yeah,
Exactly. That would be
that's-
Pascal, you
that
can
is-
put
that is
all the
deeply grim.
links you want. I'm going to actually keep putting quotes up because I understand the bipartisan bill that happened with Tip O'Neill, but I'm going to keep putting this up because it's backing up my point. So I will win every time.
No, not on this argument.
Yeah, I'm winning every time
Put up
Every time.
Put a link to that article.
because that's Tip O'Neill. That's not Ronald Reagan.
Ronald Reagan was the president. Wouldn't have had it without him.
That's a Democratic House and Senate
It was
majority.
exactly.
That
And it was
very,
a
very
bipartisan
powerful at the
consensus.
time. And
wow.
yeah, you don't want to get.
Well,
yeah, it is
I
just
think-
Pascal beef. Yeah.
I think there may have been, because they don't want mommy and daddy to fight. I think there's a way that you can both be right, where there's a very strong democratic appetite for that kind of grand bargain, where you got the social security and Medicare in order to pay off, reduce deficits, reduce expenditures. And the Republicans are willing to entertain it if they think that the Democrats will get most of the dirt on them. But if Republicans are in charge, they either propose something like George W. Bush, where it's like, you'll get to keep your Social Security, but we're just going to pour it through hedge funds and money managers in the stock market. Or you have somebody like Trump that's just willing to weaponize it for electoral advantage, because they always know that the Democrats are going to come back to it when they're in power.
God, this is a gloomy day today. It's always a gloomy day when Daniel Bessner's in the house.
It's been gloomy 100 years.
Ever since Kuba's
It feels like a
people-
normal day for me.
Kuba is definitely the black pill person of the TIR crew.
I mean, I just call it a pill. I don't see color like that.
Look, Pascal is admitting to everybody that he's pro-Reagan.
I'll tell you one thing. Bill Clinton did more damage to America than Ronald Reagan did, period.
See?
I don't see
In
that.
some sense, Clinton finished the project, I think.
He didn't have to. He didn't have to.
No, for sure. But they're part of the same historical constellation.
Absolutely. And Bill Clinton implemented it worse and did more damage to black people.
Yeah, because it was further on. He could do worse. Reagan still had to deal with people who remembered the New Deal in a way that Clinton could just be like, "Fuck it, we won the Cold War. Let's go all the way."
Damn.
Yep. It's a brutal time, and we're still living with the consequences of all the socialist parties not stopping the First World War.
Yeah,
Well-
that's really true, man. The more I think about it, that was the chance. Once the workers of Europe fought themselves, that was it.
Yep. Once they mowed each other down, we had that opportunity when they all played football on the on Christmas Day, 1914, and then that was the opportunity for revolution, and it was gone. Okay, that's
On a cheery note,
Yeah.
we've been going for almost 2 hours now, and we fadangled more time out of Bessner than I think he thought he was
And-
going to give.
and Derek.
That was the quickest 2
No,
hours. we've ever
what
done.
happened was Daniel was pimping out Derek. He was like, "Look, I'm only going to give you 25 minutes." But
Yeah, I saw that. I noticed.
I woke up sick, but I took a 3 Dayquil, so I'm riding high right now.
Is that what
you
we're calling it
got
nowadays?
Like the
Dayquil?
itching.
and
yeah, well,
this
there's
is the
Dayquil
last.
and
This is
Nyquil.
the last TIR
That's what they're
episode
calling it nowadays. It's-
from the States. Everybody, the last one being broadcast from the States. Starting next
Or-
week,
yeah.
we'll be broadcasting down south.
We'll have full NAFTA representation.
Full NAFTA.
Yeah, full NAFTA.
Full NAFTA. Pascal is very pro Reagan. I'm very pro Clinton. So
I'm not pro Reagan. Let me be very honest.
Pascal, stop. Just hug him. Go to.
Listen,
I think he's
I know-
buried
I know
down
the joke.
south of San Diego.
Listen,
Okay.
I want to say this. I'm not a fan of Ronald Reagan. Ronald Reagan was the president of my high school and college years. I will tell you this, and this is true. There are a lot of black people from my age who went to college who had that Cosby mentality. Who, though they believed Reagan was a racist, a lot of those Negroes were like, I'm glad Carter didn't win. That's why you had Ebony Magazine articles in '87 talking about the new black middle class. Are you in or are you out? So all these Negroes are going like, oh, I hated Reagan. Reagan was a racist. Reagan had the most stable expansion of the black middle class in America in the post-civil rights era. That's a fact.
What about Clinton?
Clinton was all based on a subprime mortgage crisis.
That's why I would push
and
back.
the dot-com bubble.
Yeah.
His jobs were lower paying and not the same quality, and it didn't have the deep impact as Reagan's expansion of the black middle class.
I would have to look at that to see because I would.
I had this debate on social media with Lester Spence.
I don't give a damn about Lester Spence. Give a goddamn about. I said it online. Give a goddamn.
Oh damn. I do want to say though,
this actually seems to be a really nice guy.
People shouldn't have a gloomy day. Remember that the bipartisan infrastructure. It's finally infrastructure week, y'all. Come on. Come on.
But I hope Derek and Daniel will come back. And you guys should have called your show D&D. One of you could be the dungeon, and one of you could be the dragon.
Or a double dose of this pimping.
That I mean, we can get kinky, but that sounds a little kinkier than we usually get on the show. So I don't know.
But we'd love to have you back at some point for this for more Black Pill talk.
Of course.
We definitely.
Yeah, we're happy to come and bring our gloomy cloud to other people's shows for sure.
If you could just halt the white on white violence next time, though, it's not something
White people can interrupt.
Sorry, it gets like this sometimes. Sorry.
Hey! I'll have you know it's poll on Jew violence and third on Biden violence.
And according to the rule book, when you are going to interrupt someone, you have to say point of privilege. Point of privilege.
But then you respond with the Kamala. I'm speaking.
No, you need to do the thing for I saw a Google thing where they have like I think they do it for the visually impaired actually, where they go like, "Hello, I am a white Caucasian man with a beard," and
oh yeah, I saw that.
You should just say podcast host.
Yeah, exactly. Oh, damn.
Ooh, spicy.
Got him.
We all do.
You guys are hella mean. Okay.
Jason's not a white Caucasian man with a beard.
He does
Gene,
play metal music.
You forgot. We said this earlier today. We have to have the white people on so we can get a better listener base, because whenever black people are speaking, they think we're talking about black people only shit or sports.
We had great numbers with shows when we had black people speaking.
Yeah, because they all think it's a sports show, and then they get mad when they find out it's not about the NBA. Like, you guys aren't going to talk about Kanye? There's no Kanye talk?
Have you been doing like focus group stuff on this?
Yeah.
Yeah, if you want to know where the Patreon money's going.
Why do you think? Why do you
Hired some guys from the Lincoln Project to break down the audience for him?
You guys are going to hell. Okay, we gotta go. It's late. Daniel's got to go take a bunch of NyQuil.
Now I'm being accused. Now I'm accused of being both a Stalinist and a Reagan fan. This is incredible.
Pascal, by the time this is all said and done, you will be Stalin Reagan. You will be Stalin Reagan. Yeah, you're gonna be Stalin Reagan. You're gonna be a black Alex P. Keaton.
You should write the book. The book, Stalin Reaganism. The new ideology.
It's actually kind of funny.
If you write a book called Stalin and Reagan is my N-words, and if those two write a book about Anglo,
oh my God, you're going to get a cabinet level position in the next Trump administration.
Yeah. Yes.
If these very intelligent guys can do this Andy Kaufman level fucking joke / grift, we would all be so rich. I just want you to know that. That's how you make money in podcasting.
No, the way you make money in podcasting is Jason Miles does a right-wing pivot and talks about talks about he becomes the new Candace Owens.
No,
No.
shirtless Jason reads the news.
Yes. In a hot tub.
Jason
Mhm.
OnlyFans.
Mm-hmm.
All right,
Yeah.
we are gonna do shows from the Mexico deck though.
In a
So-
hot tub. Hot tub streams.
On that
They're
note,
big.
it's time for cartoons. I love y'all.